During World War II, the German Panther tank was certainly one of the most feared machines the Allies encountered on the European battlefields. From 1943 through 1945, it was used to great and horrifying effect on both the Western and Eastern fronts. Both the men who built it and the men who fought against it regarded it as one of the best tanks ever built. The Panther tank was not as highly armored or equipped as other tanks, such as the Tiger, but it was deemed superior because it was perfectly balanced. The Panther was one of the Germans' fastest tanks. It maneuvered significantly better than other tanks, and its guns were extremely accurate and precise. However, the Panther has developed a mythology that is out of all proportion to its actual effectiveness as a weapon of war. Let's try to cut through the hype, to see how good this renowned German tank was in reality. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union and came face to face with the T-34 for the first time, the T-34 excelled the Panzer III and IV versions already in service. The Wehrmacht found itself in desperate need of a medium tank with good mobility, armor, and firepower all of a sudden. An entirely new design was started, taking into consideration the lessons learned from researching the T-34. By April 1942, Daimler-Benz, DB, which had produced the successful Panzer III and Stug III, and MAN had been tasked with designing a new 30 to 35-ton tank. The DB's hull and turret were similar to the T-34's, and it was likewise to be propelled by a diesel engine. The turret was located forward and was driven from the rear drive sprocket. The MAN design had a more traditional layout, with the transmission and drive sprocket in the front and a turret in the middle. It had an 8-torsion bar suspension axle per side and a gasoline engine. Hitler appears to have preferred the DB design. However, the MAN design was chosen after a study by a special commission appointed by Hitler in May 1942. After examining it overnight, Hitler approved the decision. One of the primary reasons given for this decision was that the MAN design utilized an existing turret designed by Rheinmetall Borsig, but the DB design would have needed the design and manufacturing of a whole new turret and engine, delaying the commencement of production. The continued evolution of the design was hampered by this time-saving measure. The MAN Panther was higher and had a wider hull than the DB design due to the torsion bar suspension and the drive shaft running under the turret basket. The tank's 16 rubber-rimmed steel road wheels on each side were interleaved in order to accommodate 8 axles on each side. As a result, the ground pressure was low and the weight distribution was uniform. This mechanism, known as Schachtel-Laufwerk, had already been utilized on a number of German half-track vehicles, and a Tiger tank with a very similar design was also set to enter production. The KWK-42L70, the Panther's infamous gun, was a 75mm high-velocity cannon with a smaller caliber but a higher velocity than its contemporaries. This gun was developed primarily as a tank killer, with a high muzzle velocity and the ability to penetrate 150mm of armor at a range of 1 kilometer. The new tank was designed to be faster and more agile than the Tiger, and its name reflected this increased agility. However, Hitler began interfering practically as soon as the design was authorized for production, as he did so frequently. He demanded that the frontal armor thickness be raised, among other things. As a result, the final design was substantially heavier than intended. The original design called for a 30 to 35-ton tank, while manufacturing Panthers weighed closer to 50 tons, which was the Tiger's original design weight. The demand for this tank was so high that the manufacturing was soon expanded beyond man to include Daimler-Benz and others. There were three main versions of the Panther, versions D, A and G, with each new version incorporating significant improvements. The Panther was such a successful weapon that a total of 6,000 of them were manufactured during the war. Panther got a reputation of unreliability because it was rushed into service long before it got past prototyping. The Panther, like any weapon system, was designed to strike a compromise between combat requirements and practical factors. For example, the KWK-42 main gun was one of the most effective anti-armor cannons used by any tank throughout World War II. It did, however, have some severe flaws. Its length of almost 5 meters, for example, rendered it ungainly in street battle and in difficult terrain like Normandy's bocage. The KWK-42 cannon possessed a high muzzle velocity, which made it a powerful tank killer, but it also meant that shells had to be specially reinforced. This wasn't a problem with armor-piercing shells, but it decreased the amount of explosive in HE shells significantly. As a result, the Panther was substantially less effective as an anti-infantry weapon or against reinforced positions. When the tank's main gun was fired, the muzzle explosion was powerful enough to cause concussions in any friendly infantry nearby. Because of the Panther's shortcomings in the infantry support role, substantial numbers of Panzer III and IVs, which it was supposed to replace, were nevertheless constructed. The Panther's main gun had a basic weakness, even as an anti-tank weapon. Only a telescopic binocular sight was available to the gunner. Once the target was identified, it was quite effective, but the initial location was a problem. The Panther was beaten at Aricourt by mostly 75mm Shermans. The Panther's gunner lacked a periscope and had to rely on the commander to correct his shots, but statistics on how this impacted the Panther's gunnery would be impossible to find. The Panther's weight was also an issue. Some bridges were inaccessible, and special railroad wagons were necessary for rail transport. The suspension on the Panther was over-engineered, and the interleaved road wheel design made replacing inner road wheels time-consuming. The interleaved wheels were also prone to becoming clogged with mud, rocks, and ice, and they could freeze solid overnight in the cold winter weather that followed the autumn Rasputitsa mud season on the Eastern Front. Shell damage could cause the road wheels to jam together and become difficult to separate. The Panther's armor was a formidable feature. The tank had an upper glassy plate thickness of 80mm and was sloped at 55 degrees from vertical, giving an effective thickness of 139.5mm and a lower glassy of 60mm, also at 55 degrees, giving an effective thickness of 104.6mm. However, the Panther's armor was far from flawless. Even if not penetrated, the face-hardened steel had a tendency to spawn lethal splinters into the tank's interior. Early Panthers had minimal belly armor, roughly 16mm, rendering them especially vulnerable to anti-tank mines. Early versions of the Panther's side armor was also thin, measuring roughly 40mm, and hits to the sides resulted in many Panthers being destroyed by catastrophic fires. As the war progressed, Germany was forced to reduce or eliminate critical alloying metals in the production of armor plate, such as nickel, tungsten and molybdenum. This resulted in lower impact resistance levels compared to earlier armor. The Panther's biggest problem was its poor reliability. Part of the problem was a manufacturing one. Early versions were rushed into service, while later models were impeded by a lack of high-grade steel and Allied bombing of manufacturing sites. Design alterations, on the other hand, contributed to the engine's and final drive's poor reliability. The engine and transmission were built for a tank weighing 30 to 35 tons. Because the production Panther was more than 30% heavier, these components proved to be fragile in use. Panther engines consumed a lot of fuel, and the engine compartment was sealed because the Panther was designed to be amphibious. This resulted in severe overheating and fires. Head gaskets blew out frequently, and bearing and rod problems were common. In post-war tests, Panthers were found to require final drive repair or replacement after only 150 kilometers, less than the range of a single tank of fuel. It was difficult for many units to keep more than half of their Panthers operational. In July 1943, the Panther Ds, which were pushed into action for the Battle of Kursk, had an average serviceability of only 16%. By the end of the year, it had risen to 37%. To avoid the risk of breakdowns, any scheduled journey of 25 kilometers or more was made by rail if at all possible. The Panther's reliability improved as the war continued, although it was never particularly spectacular. 60 to 70% of early Panthers deployed on the Eastern Front were lost owing to mechanical issues rather than enemy action, according to General Heinz Guderian. The Panther was also prone to catching fire. The fuel pumps, carburetors, and fuel lines on early models were prone to leaks, resulting in gasoline pools in the engine compartment. This could pour onto hot engine parts and catch fire while driving up a slope. During combat, the risk of fire was considerably greater, and more Panthers were destroyed by fires than the American Sherman, which is known for being particularly prone to fire. A Panther was a potent anti-armor weapon when fully operational. However, due to rushed early manufacture and alterations to the fundamental concept, Panthers were frequently rendered inoperable for a variety of reasons. When we consider the Panther's inability to serve as an infantry support weapon, as well as its other shortcomings, it is difficult to crown it as the best tank of World War II. If you have enjoyed the video, please subscribe and support the channel for more. Many thanks for watching.